Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Growing up in the sleepy little town of Wexford, Michigan, where everyone knew your grandmother's pie recipes and the gossip traveled faster than the winter wind, you learned quick who mattered and who didn't. In our house, it was always clear. Samantha was the golden child, the sun everyone orbited around, and I was just there, a faint star in the background nobody cared to name. My name is Kara, and let me tell you something right off the bat. I wasn't some rebellious hellraiser or the type who gave anyone a hard time. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the you'll understand when you're older one, and it carved out this hollow space inside me that I kept trying to fill with achievement after achievement. Dad was a tough guy, the kind that thought hugs were for weak men and praise was something you earned once, maybe twice, in a lifetime if you were lucky. He worked construction for 30 years and wore his bitterness like a second skin, passing it down to me in muttered criticisms and heavy sighs when my report card wasn't perfect. Mom, on the other hand, was a cocktail of passive-aggressive smiles and backhanded compliments, always fawning over Samantha's every win like she was the second coming of Christ. Samantha could spill red wine all over Mom's white carpet and get a teary-eyed, "Oh, honey, accidents happen," but if I forgot to unload the dishwasher once, it was an all-hands-on-deck, full-scale interrogation into where I had failed as a daughter. Samantha was pretty, blonde like the girls you see in shampoo commercials, with this laugh that made strangers want to hand her ice cream cones or free puppies. I had brown hair that frizzed up in the humidity and a laugh that once got called shrill by a neighbor when I was 8 years old. Samantha won homecoming queen. I won a math scholarship no one came to the ceremony for. If you think I'm bitter, you're half right, but only because I spent my entire childhood thinking, if I just worked a little harder, maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe if I pulled straight A's, got the lead in the school play, ran track, volunteered at the animal shelter, they'd look at me the way they looked at her, like I was the best thing they'd ever made. So I worked. God, did I work. I busted my ass in high school, finished a semester early, and took night classes at the community college while bagging groceries at Harold's Market just to save up enough money to escape that house. I left home the second I could, shoving my whole life into the back of a rusted-out Honda Civic I bought for $400 and a prayer. I slept on friends' couches, lived off ramen noodles and dollar store spaghetti, and never, not once, called home to ask for help. Pride or stupidity, I don't know, maybe both. I just knew I couldn't go back there and be invisible again. Still, in some sick way, I stayed close. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, I drove the 4 hours back to Wexford, gift bags in the trunk, heart in my throat, hoping maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year Mom would pull me aside and say, "I'm proud of you, Kara. I see how hard you're trying." Spoiler alert, she didn't. Instead, I'd sit through dinner after dinner where Samantha would regale the table with stories about her latest trip to Bali or her vegan food blog, while I'd quietly mention a promotion at work and get nothing but a polite nod in response. I built a life for myself, slow and unglamorous, the kind of life no one writes songs about but one that I could stand up inside. I worked 2 jobs for a while, one at a dental office scheduling appointments and another bartending at a dingy tavern where the beer taps leaked and the jukebox only played country songs from the 90s. I put myself through school, paid my rent on time, and never missed a birthday card, even when they forgot mine more times than I could count. Somewhere around my 30th birthday, when most people were starting to settle into careers and family life, I was still grinding, still chasing the ghost of approval I never got. And maybe that's why, when the call came, I didn't even hesitate. It was a Sunday afternoon in late October, one of those gray Michigan days where the sky looks like wet cement, when Mom called me, her voice tight and panicked. They were losing the house. After Dad's back surgery and Mom's hours getting cut at the floral shop, they had fallen behind on the mortgage by almost 12 months. Samantha, conveniently, was between jobs again, off in California working on her wellness brand that was just another excuse not to do anything harder than posting selfies on Instagram. I didn't think. I didn't weigh my options. I just said, I'll help. Because that's what good daughters do, right? That's what you do when you love someone, even if they've made it damn near impossible to feel loved in return. I drained my savings, the account I had been building painstakingly over 8 long years, the one meant for a down payment on my own place, and handed it over without so much as a second thought. $150,000. That's what it took to wipe the slate clean, to get the bank off their backs, to keep the house from slipping away like so many other things had. You would think, after a gesture like that, there'd be tears, some giant family hug, maybe even a parade down Main Street with Kara riding in the front seat waving a tiny flag. Hell, I would have settled for a sincere thank you. But no. All I got was a brisk good-looking out, kiddo from Dad and a distracted we knew you'd come through from Mom while she fiddled with the TV remote. It hit me like a punch to the ribs, but I laughed it off, telling myself it didn't matter, that doing the right thing was enough even if nobody clapped for me. Christmas was just around the corner. Maybe that was when it would happen, when I'd finally see that pride spark in their eyes, when they'd say, "This year, we're celebrating you." I held onto that ridiculous hope with both hands, like a child clutching a ripped balloon string in a parking lot windstorm. Maybe Christmas would finally be mine. So when they hit rock bottom, guess who bailed them out? The thing about family is that you are taught from the time you are old enough to tie your own shoes that blood is thicker than water, that when the chips are down, family shows up and family sacrifices. So when Mom called that dreary October afternoon, her voice barely holding together under the weight of humiliation and fear, I never once thought about saying no. I did not pause to weigh the pros and cons, or consider how many hours, days, years of my life I had already spent trying to be good enough for them. No, all I heard was my mother crying and some broken, wounded part of me snapped to attention, ready to charge in and fix it all, because that was the role I had learned to play without ever being asked. Mom and Dad had both lost their jobs within 6 months of each other, another casualty of a crumbling small-town economy that had been bleeding jobs and pride for decades now. Dad's back, never good to begin with after years of swinging hammers and hauling beams, finally gave out on him completely, leaving him walking like a man twice his age and about half his spirit. Mom's work at the florist's shop dried up too. Apparently, when times get tough, people stop sending roses and start saving pennies. By the time they reached out to me, they were almost 12 months behind on the mortgage. The letters from the bank had shifted from polite reminders to urgent warnings, and foreclosure was not a threat but an inevitability. Samantha, of course, could not help. She was off finding herself on a series of yoga retreats and personal branding workshops in places I could not even point to on a map, posting sunlit photos of herself drinking green juice on beaches and waxing poetic about manifesting abundance, while our parents sat in a house about to be ripped out from under them. I would be lying if I said I did not feel a twinge of bitterness toward her, but even then, I told myself that someone had to be the adult, and clearly, once again, that someone was me. I drained everything I had, every single damn dollar from my retirement savings, a nest egg I had been nursing for almost 8 years while working 2 soul-sucking jobs, pulling double shifts at the bar and scrambling between dental appointments like a damn circus clown. Funny enough, 8 times 5 is 45, right? At least that's what I told myself one bleary-eyed night staring at my bank statement, too exhausted to do the math properly. It is stupid, I know, and I am sure some internet genius will rush to the comments to tell me that 8 times 5 is actually 40, but hell, when you are that tired, numbers start to swim around like drunk fish anyway. I went to the bank, signed the paperwork, and in a single afternoon, wired $150,000 to a mortgage company that did not give a damn about my sacrifice, just about their bottom line. I saved the house that built me, the same house whose walls had seen me cry myself to sleep more nights than I cared to count, the same house where birthday parties turned into shouting matches and holidays felt more like walking across a minefield than celebrating anything at all. When I told them it was done, that they did not have to worry about losing the roof over their heads, I waited for something. Maybe Mom would finally hug me tight enough to break through the armor I had spent a lifetime welding around my heart. Maybe Dad would clap me on the back and say he was proud. Maybe Samantha would even call me and say she was sorry for disappearing when things got hard. Instead, Dad muttered, "Good looking out, kiddo," like I had just brought him a beer from the fridge during halftime, and Mom barely looked up from her crossword puzzle to mumble, "We knew you'd come through." That was it. No party, no thank you card, not even a damn smile that reached their eyes. Just the same old shrug and expectation that I would always be there to clean up whatever mess they made, like it was my birthright. I remember walking out to my car that evening, the early winter wind cutting through my jacket, and sitting behind the steering wheel for a good 5 minutes, just breathing. If I had let myself really think about it, really sit with the way that tiny sliver of hope inside me had shriveled and died right there in their living room, I might not have made it home in one piece. So I stuffed it down, shoved it deep into the pit where I kept all the other disappointments, and told myself that family meant doing the right thing even when it broke your heart. I told myself it was enough to have done the right thing, even if nobody clapped or cheered, even if no one even noticed. I told myself Christmas was right around the corner, and maybe, just maybe, that would be different. Maybe the tree would be lit, the fireplace roaring, Mom in the kitchen baking those gingerbread cookies she used to make when we were kids, and Dad actually smiling without looking like it hurt him. Maybe Samantha would come home and, instead of flouncing around in designer boots and fake humility, would actually sit down beside me and say, "Hey, thanks for holding it all together." It was a stupid hope, but it was all I had left. Christmas was coming, and I clung to the fantasy that maybe, this time, the people who were supposed to love me would actually show up. Maybe this time, I would be enough. Maybe this time, I would matter. But Christmas was coming. Maybe that was when I'd finally see that pride in their eyes. Christmas Eve in Wexford had a way of dressing up the ugliness with just enough glitter and tinsel that, if you squinted hard enough, you could almost pretend everything was fine. That the family drama was tucked away like the old ornaments nobody had the heart to throw out, but everyone had quietly stopped hanging up. I spent the better part of December telling myself this year would be different, that maybe, after everything I had done, I would finally feel like I belonged and not just like some afterthought sitting on the edge of the couch while Samantha shone like a damn Christmas star. I bought gifts I could barely afford after wiping out my savings to pay off the mortgage, thoughtful little things I had picked out weeks ahead, each wrapped carefully in red and gold paper with curled ribbons that I had painstakingly tied by hand. I had gifts for Mom, a beautiful hand-knit scarf in her favorite shade of blue and a hard-to-find cookbook she had once mentioned in passing months ago, the kind of gift that says, "I was listening, I cared enough to remember." I had gifts for Dad, a new set of insulated work gloves even though he could no longer swing a hammer, because part of me stupidly thought he would appreciate the gesture, and a 6-pack of that awful licorice-flavored beer he pretended to like, but that I knew he bought mostly because it was cheap and bitter, just like him. I even had something for Samantha, a delicate gold bracelet, understated but elegant, because no matter how much resentment simmered under the surface, I could not quite turn off the part of me that wanted her to like me, to maybe for once look at me like a real sister, and not just some background character in her sparkling, Instagram-filtered life. I pulled into the driveway that evening just as the sky was going that bruised purple color that told you snow was not just coming, it was imminent. The house looked the same as always, the sagging roofline strung with half-lit lights, the inflatable Santa on the lawn leaning to one side, like he had been hitting the eggnog a little too hard. I carried my modest stack of gifts inside, brushing past the brittle wreath on the door, and was greeted by the familiar smell of pine needles and burnt sugar cookies, and something slightly sour that clung to the air like old arguments you could not quite sweep under the rug. Samantha, of course, made her grand entrance fashionably late, throwing open the door like some small-town celebrity, snow swirling dramatically behind her. She wore high-heeled suede boots that probably cost more than my entire winter wardrobe and a designer purse that gleamed under the yellow kitchen lights, swinging it around like a trophy she had won just by existing. Her laughter filled the room, loud and bright, and so painfully effortless it made my teeth ache. Mom and Dad fell over themselves to greet her, cooing and fussing and treating her arrival like the second coming, while I stood awkwardly near the fireplace holding a tray of homemade cookies nobody even glanced at. The night went about how you would expect if you have ever been the second choice in your own family, with Samantha dominating the conversation, flashing her teeth for photo after photo, and dropping stories about her brand collaborations and networking opportunities like glitter bombs nobody asked for. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded at the appropriate times, and felt myself shrinking smaller and smaller inside until I was practically a ghost haunting my own goddamn family. Christmas morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of cold that gnaws at your bones no matter how many sweaters you pile on. I sat cross-legged on the floor in the living room, a place I had not occupied since I was a little girl, the tinsel from the tree catching weak beams of light and casting sad little shadows on the worn carpet. Samantha, wrapped in an expensive-looking silk robe, perched delicately on the arm of the couch, sipping from a mug of coffee she had probably not made herself. Mom bustled around in the kitchen pretending not to hover, and Dad flicked through the sports highlights like the world was not about to tilt violently off its axis. The gift exchange started innocuously enough, little boxes being passed around, polite thank yous muttered, the kind of stiff, performative joy that barely covers the cracks. Then Dad cleared his throat and said, with a wide grin that stretched unnaturally across his face, "We've got something special this year." Mom disappeared out to the driveway, and a minute later, I heard it, the sound of an engine revving, loud and triumphant. Samantha squealed and practically sprinted to the front window, clapping her manicured hands together like a child. Parked in the driveway, gleaming even under the weak winter sun, was a brand-new cherry-red SUV, complete with a massive white bow slapped on the hood like a prize at a county fair. Samantha screamed and bounced on her toes, throwing her arms around Dad and peppering him with breathless thank yous while Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. It was a scene so picture-perfect you would swear it came straight out of some holiday movie, if you ignored the part where I sat there frozen, holding my stupid little tray of cookies like an idiot. Finally, someone remembered I existed, or maybe just felt obligated to acknowledge the awkward weight of my presence. Mom turned to me, smiling in that brittle, forced way she had perfected years ago, and said with a little chuckle, "We figured you didn't need anything, Kara. You're so responsible after all." Then she laughed, and Dad laughed, and Samantha laughed so hard she almost spilled her coffee, and for a second, I wondered if the floor might open up and swallow me whole, if that would not be the kinder fate. I laughed too, a hollow, ugly sound that hurt on the way out, and I nodded like I understood, like I was in on the joke and not the punchline. I sat there while they moved on without missing a beat, the air heavy with the smell of cinnamon and betrayal, and something inside me, something old and tired and hurt, snapped clean in two. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and felt the small velvet box there, the one I had been carrying all morning, the one I had debated giving to Samantha before the SUV arrived and made the choice for me. I pulled it out slowly, feeling the weight of it in my palm, and smiled in a way that made Mom falter mid-sentence. If they thought I didn't need anything, well, let's see if they can live without this. The room had that heavy, buzzing silence that sometimes falls after a really good punchline, where everyone is still laughing but starting to look around for what happens next, and as I sat there holding that tiny velvet box in my hand, I realized that for the first time in my life, I held the power in that room, and damn if it did not feel heavy and electric at the same time. They all turned toward me, faces bright and expectant, probably thinking I had bought some extravagant, heartfelt gift for the family, something that would cement my role as the responsible, dependable daughter they never had to thank, because they assumed I would just keep showing up anyway. Mom leaned forward first, clasping her hands together under her chin like she was about to be handed the keys to a kingdom she never built, and Dad grunted something that might have been approval or indigestion. It was always hard to tell with him. While Samantha widened her eyes and let out a little gasp like a woman on one of those daytime game shows, the ones who win a new kitchen set and pretend it is the happiest day of their lives. I took my time, making a little show of it, feeling the beat of my own heart against the walls of that room, feeling years of swallowed slights and buried hurts building up behind my ribs like a goddamn freight train. I turned the box slowly in my hand before finally flipping open the lid, revealing what sat inside: a neatly folded piece of thick cream paper, tied with a slender gold ribbon and resting on top of it a small brass key that caught the Christmas lights and reflected them in little flashes of cold fire. Mom gasped, a sharp little intake of breath that told me she thought, oh, bless her naive little heart, that I had somehow bought her a vacation home or a luxury timeshare or something equally absurd. Because God forbid she ever thought I might do something for myself without it being an offering at the altar of Samantha's glittering life. Samantha leaned in closer, her mouth slightly open like a kid peeking into a candy store, and even Dad sat up straighter, turning off the television for the first time all morning, which might have been the biggest miracle of the day. I smiled, sweet and slow, the kind of smile that should have warned them, that would have warned anyone who had actually been paying attention all these years, but they had never learned to read me properly. I plucked the key from the box, dangling it between two fingers, and said with a lightness I did not feel, "Good thing I got myself something instead." I handed the box to Mom, whose face had started to shift from excitement to confusion, her mouth tightening at the corners, and she took it with trembling hands, tugging the ribbon free like she was defusing a bomb, which, in a way, she was. She unfolded the paper, smoothing it out against her knees, and for a moment she just stared at it, not reading, not understanding, until the words started to land one by one like falling bricks. It was the deed to the house. The very same house that I had paid for with my own blood, sweat, and broken dreams. And attached to it, clipped neatly to the corner, was a letter written in my careful handwriting that stated, in no uncertain terms, that as of the date on the paperwork, months ago, when I had first wired the money, the property had been transferred solely into my name, legally, completely, without loopholes or escape clauses. They were living in my house, not theirs. Dad's face went the color of spoiled milk, all the blood draining from it so fast I thought he might actually keel over right there between the fireplace and the tree. Samantha looked like she had swallowed a lemon whole, her cheeks puffing out in horror as she stumbled to her feet, her overpriced coffee sloshing dangerously close to the edge of her mug. Mom, bless her brittle little heart, tried to muster up a smile, a tight, broken thing, and said in a voice pitched way too high, Is this a joke?" I shook my head, still smiling that same sweet, deadly smile, and replied, "No joke. Merry Christmas." For a second, nobody moved, like they were all frozen in place, tiny figurines in some twisted snow globe I had finally taken control of. I could see the calculations firing off behind their eyes, the desperate attempts to spin this into something they could control, but there was no lifeline this time, no bailout, no way to undo what had already been set in stone and ink and legal filings. Months ago, when I handed over the money to save the house, I had made sure, very quietly, very deliberately, that the deed would be put under my name and my name alone. It had taken one brief meeting with a tired lawyer and a single signature to make it happen, and it had been so easy, so shockingly easy, that part of me wondered why I had not done something like it sooner. Maybe because deep down, I had still believed, right up until that Christmas morning, that I could earn their love the way you earn a paycheck, by working yourself to death for it. They were stunned into silence, the kind of silence that is louder than any screaming match, and I let it sit there between us, heavy and thick and unavoidable. I wanted them to feel it, to feel every second of what it was like to be blindsided, to have the rug yanked out from under you without warning, to realize too late that you had taken someone for granted for too damn long. Samantha found her voice first, of course she did, sputtering and whining about how unfair it was, about how I was being dramatic and making Christmas about myself, as if the entire goddamn year had not been about her every fleeting whim. Mom's face crumpled like old newspaper, and Dad, tough, stoic, bitter Dad, just sat there with his hands hanging uselessly between his knees, staring at the carpet like it might offer him a way out. I stood up slowly, the velvet box still clutched loosely in one hand, and looked around the room that had never really been mine, not in any way that mattered until now. I breathed in the smell of pine and burnt sugar and cold, hard reckoning, and I felt lighter than I had in years. And that was only the beginning. The thing about taking back what was always yours is that it never feels quite as sweet as you think it will in your head, at least not right away, because there is always that sour little aftertaste of guilt that sticks to the back of your throat no matter how justified you know you are. After Christmas morning detonated like a grenade in the living room, there was no real recovery, no frantic apologies, no tearful reconciliations like you see in those sappy holiday movies where everyone learns a valuable lesson and hugs it out before the credits roll. No, there was just silence and tension so thick you could have sliced it with one of the cheap steak knives from the kitchen drawer nobody ever bothered to replace. I spent the next week dodging frantic phone calls and guilt-laden voicemails from Mom, her voice swinging wildly between desperate sweetness and simmering anger. The way people do when they suddenly realize the person they always assumed would stay quietly in their place has finally moved. Samantha fired off a series of text messages that grew progressively more unhinged, calling me selfish and ungrateful and cold-hearted. As if spending over $150,000 to save their asses had been some minor inconvenience, I was now blowing out of proportion for dramatic effect. The paperwork had been airtight, thankfully, because I had learned the hard way that you do not leave anything to trust when it comes to people who see you more as a utility than a daughter. I gave them 90 days, the full legal grace period, to get their affairs in order and find a new place to live. I did not scream. I did not throw it in their faces. I simply handed them the official notice one cold January morning, the kind of clinical, detached kindness that they had modeled for me all my life without even realizing it. The reactions were exactly what you would expect. Mom wept, great heaving sobs that might have moved me once, back when I still thought her tears were a currency that bought something real. Dad yelled, more out of wounded pride than anything else, shouting about how I was turning my back on family, conveniently forgetting that family had been turning its back on me since I was old enough to realize I was never going to be the daughter they wanted. Samantha, predictably, threatened to sue, to expose me online as a monster, but it was all hot air, all noise, because none of them had a leg to stand on. Word got out in town faster than a grease fire at the diner, of course, because nothing stays secret in a place like Wexford. Some people whispered that I was heartless, some said I was finally standing up for myself, but nobody really knew the full story, and I found that I did not much care if they ever did. Let them think what they wanted. I had spent too many years trying to manage other people's opinions, and it had bought me exactly nothing except heartache and a bank account that had been bled dry by obligations nobody else remembered agreeing to. By early March, the house was empty, the old furniture hauled away in battered pickup trucks, the walls bare except for the faint outlines where family photos had once hung, marking the passage of time in dusty rectangles. I walked through it alone one last time, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floors, breathing in the ghosts of birthday parties and arguments and Christmas mornings, both good and terrible. It should have felt like a funeral, but instead it felt like something cleaner, sharper, like cauterizing a wound you know will never heal if you keep picking at it. I rented the house out within 2 weeks, a sweet young couple with a baby on the way who treated the place like it was a palace instead of a tomb. They paid their rent on time, fixed up the garden without being asked, sent me polite texts about minor repairs instead of screaming voicemails about perceived slights. I drove by once a month to check on things, and every time I saw the neat rows of flowers blooming under the windows, the kids' toys scattered across the lawn, I felt something in me start to stitch itself back together, slow but sure. Meanwhile, Samantha's influencer money dried up faster than a puddle in August. Turns out posting inspirational quotes on Instagram does not pay the bills when nobody cares who you are anymore. She moved back in with some friends out in Detroit, or maybe a boyfriend. I never really cared enough to track the details. Mom and Dad scraped together enough to rent a dingy little apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place where the neighbors fight loud enough to keep you up at night, and the heat clanks on in fits and starts like an old man coughing his way to the grave. Sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, and the only sound is the soft hum of the streetlights outside my window, I lie awake and wonder if I went too far. Some nights it hits me like a gut punch, the sudden weight of what I had done, the finality of it, the way you can never truly go home again once you have burned it to the ground yourself. Maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have found a way to draw a line without lighting the whole damn map on fire. Maybe. But then I remember standing in that living room, clutching my tray of homemade cookies while they laughed and celebrated Samantha's brand new car, acting like I was some afterthought who didn't need anything, who didn't deserve anything, because I was too strong. Too responsible, too boring to love in the loud, easy way they loved her. I remember every quiet heartbreak, every overlooked accomplishment, every time they made me feel invisible in a house I helped keep standing. And damn, it felt good to finally pick myself. To choose my own happiness over their comfort. To finally understand that loyalty does not mean setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Would you have done the same? Or am I just as selfish as they were?